Hi, all. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Natasha Lena Yulman, and I'm a staff writer at Labor Notes. I'm joined by my co moderator, David Dayan of the American Prospect, and our brilliant panel that I will introduce in just a moment. There is no denying that the labor movement is in a precarious moment. Trump has torn up union contracts covering 1 million federal employees, the single largest union busting act in US history. His administration is terrorizing immigrant workers with barbaric raids in the public eye in hopes of pushing workers into the shadows. An already hamstrung NLRB is facing court challenges that could severely undermine its long term functioning, and employers are hell bent on testing the limits of their power in this moment to discipline workers and their unions. What can unions do to survive in the second Trump presidency? What tactics and strategies can help organize more new members and best survive an all out assault on labor and other rights? This is a question we've been taking up at Labor Notes through our Roundtable series in partnership with the American Prospect, which you can find at labornotes.org/roundtable and soon to be reprinted at full at prospect.org. Labor Notes has been soliciting contributions from organizers and scholars on what unions can do besides hide or try to curry favor. Our goal is to help organizers think about this moment that we're in and reflect critically on strategies at their disposal. We're very grateful for our co sponsors, Haymarket Books and the American Prospect, for making this event possible. And I'm grateful that we are joined by our panelists who are uniquely equipped to help us think through these questions. We're joined tonight by Brendan Mancilla, UAW Region 9A Director, Diamond Say Brown, President of the Baltimore Teachers Union, and Jackson Potter, Vice President of the Chicago Teachers Union. I am going to kick us off with a question for all of you. To start, can you give us a sense of how the terrain has shifted for your union and other unions you're in touch with over the past year? What has changed under Trump?
I can start. A couple of things have shifted. One of the things I'm noticing is that we're getting a lot more requests to be in coalitions. I think that's a great thing. And we really want to take advantage of that. It's great to see more uh, workers seeking to work together. We're also fortunately getting more members interested in organizing. I know a lot of people are feeling a lot of fear and uncertainty in this time, but people are using that fear to do something, and they're reaching out to say, how can I be more involved in my union, or how can is there anything that you guys are working on that I can be helpful with? There's been a lot more focus on revenue generation. I think because people are seeing all the different ways that uh, we're being challenged with funding cuts. And so people want to be more on offense there. And lastly, I'll say that I've seen a lot more um, communal spaces be created. And I know in my local, at the Baltimore Teachers Union, we are intentionally creating more space for people to be communal, because people don't want to be alone. They want to be together. They want to feel joy. They want to feel a sense of belonging. And so we're creating those opportunities for people to do that. And I'm seeing that happen in a lot of other spaces as well.
Happy to go next. Um, Agree with what was said around like the coalition work that President Brown referenced is growing, and it's kind of the best of worlds and the worst of worlds. We have, the 13th largest military on the planet in ICE and federal agencies deploying into our cities and wreaking havoc, spreading terror and fear, pointing guns, using unconstitutional police tactics, really trying to inflict a Gestapo like terror on our communities, and yet instill the greatest amount of like solidaristic expression I've seen in my lifetime, with people coming out of the woodwork, setting up rapid response, going to schools before and after dismissal to protect and defend monitor, resist, confront, and willingly put their bodies on the line to ensure that our neighbors, immigrant families, Black families that are in the crosshairs of this administration are protected. I'd also say that workers and our unions seem to be finally considering that maybe what we've been doing all along isn't working, and certainly not well enough. So, we just held the first strike school that Mayday Strong sponsored with People's Action. And there were clergy, there were immigrant rights groups, there were civil rights groups, there were auto workers and nurses and communication workers and teachers together cross training. And there just isn't enough of that outside of labor notes, where unions themselves are willingly and voluntarily partaking in that kind of dynamic effort. So I have a lot of hope, and there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think, well, first of all, thank you all for the invitation and for hosting this event. Um, I think it's important to take account of what is truly different about this moment and what is the same and a continuity of what we've been dealing with all along, because I think that's the only way to actually make sense of what we're supposed to do as a labor movement and as working class organizations going forward. Um, what is truly shocking and horrible is, everything that, my two co-panelists have already said. The escalation of attacks on immigrants, on civil rights, on civil liberties, the attack on unions, and the attack on federal workers specifically, which dwarfs what happened to Patco, frankly, by this point. And also, I think there was a moment, where we thought in the labor movement, nowhere near the scale needed, but that we could revive a labor movement. We could organize. We could start thinking about building density. This was because of, a combination of big reform efforts in major unions like the Teamsters and UAW, and of course that's building on the legacy of CTU and others within the teachers unions and the rank and file efforts that have happened in the labor movement among teachers over the last decade. But there's also the Biden NLRB, which was, truly trying to tip the scale back to an equal playing field, away from corporate power and the bosses. And so, we had the breakthrough at Amazon. We had Starbucks Workers United. The UAW finally organized at Volkswagen in Tennessee. I can go on and on about all the different victories at small workplaces to large workplaces that we were starting to see. And that has really taken a hit. It's not over. By no means does that mean that organizing is not possible under Trump or under this new um, federal landscape. But what has happened is a sense that we are a lot more on defense, right? And it's hard to think about a positive vision if you're always having to defend the very little you have. And so the Trump offensive has been really something, and it's been disorienting, I think, a lot politically for people in order to make sense of that. But what's the same? The same is that, we're still dealing with the same forces as always, right? I said escalation of attacks against immigrants. I didn't say for the first time ever attack on immigrants, right? I said, a horrible turn at the NLRB doesn't mean we haven't dealt with NLRBs that are not worker friendly or union friendly in the past. Corporate greed, concentration of power, rampant inequality, and at the bottom of it, politically, a Democratic Party that doesn't know how to take on a fight. And so that's the other part of this, right? That we have to organize a different kind of vision politically. And I think, one thing that we'll touch upon, I think, today is also the fact that um, say what we want about what the labor movement stands for and working class principles and organization. More working class people voted for Donald Trump in this past election than they did in the previous two elections, and that needs to be taken into account because any vision going forward that is centered on a different vision of working class politics has to make sense that you're going to have to organize with those very same people. You cannot ignore that. You have to work within the conditions of what the working class is today to begin with. So that looks different in New York City, in Chicago, in LA, in Tennessee, right? And I think that's also important to take into account, that you have to be rooted in those local fights. But we have no choice but to engage in those fights as they are right now.
Great. Well, thank you to Brandon and our panelists. I just want to say that the American Prospect is proud to be partnering on this, and thanks to Labor Notes for reaching out and making this happen. I want to follow a little bit on some of what Brandon said and put this question out to the group. You know, a lot of people, I think, talk about the Trump administration in these very existential terms, like we're in a fight for our democracy. This is an existential moment for whether it's the labor movement or just sort of the polity writ large. But there's another existential moment for unions that's been happening all along, and this is similar to what Brandon was saying. Right now, we have what, 6% union density in the private sector, which was, you know, in the 30s, in the 1950s and 60s. So the question is, how do you work on not just beating back the existential threat of today and move forward on the existential threat that's been happening for 40 years, which is the slow dissolution of union density across the entire economy? And any of you can take that.
I mean, I can start this round. You know, I think it's good to look at history in terms of when we've seen the labor movement rise and fall. And so it's important to note, you know, if you look at the 1920s, according to historian Stephen Hahn, the biggest political movement of the 20s was the Ku Klux Klan, and it was in the North. Chicago, you know, I think had 50,000 members. There were 5 million members nationwide. You had, you know, Father Coughlin, you had Huey Long, you had these populists really feeding a frenzy of xenophobia and anti-Semitism. And it was the Great Depression that interrupted that movement's momentum. You know, you had anti-immigrant laws passed, and during that moment, workers rose up. You know, you had the Flint strikes, you had steel strikes, you had all kinds of activity, Minneapolis truckers, and those things in building the CIO created the greatest improvement to workers' lives in probably the entire history of the country. And it shifted into a New Deal that, you know, went away from the kind of eugenics that had dominated the prior period. So that tells me that a phoenix can rise from the ashes, that the labor movement is not even close to being extinguished, that it just takes some sparks and effort and initiative, coordination, resources, and, you know, some vision, imagination to revive what seems to be broken or dormant. And we did that with the CTU. Like in 2012, we engaged structures that had been moribund and were, you know, petrified in kind of bad practice, and revived them to a point where we, you know, were able to take on one of the most powerful politicians and beat them in Chicago. And that lent itself to a whole set of teachers taking action, even in red states with the Red for Ed movement, where union rights weren't secure or institutional, and people were able to win big things that way. So I do think right now is a moment where, you know, unions have a high degree of popularity. You know, people think socialism is viable. So how do we generate opportunities for not just those in unions, that 10%, but the, you know, 100% of workers who need one, who want health care that's affordable, who want dignified living wages, who want affordable housing, who believe in free college and early childhood education for all and childcare for all. These are popular majoritarian issues. And so, to Brandon's point, you know, if we stand on these popular issues and we begin an arc of escalation together, labor and community united in coalition, I think it's unstoppable. And we just have to provide some vehicles and opportunities for people to express that shared vision.
I agree with Jackson, and I really agree with the vision setting. I'm a strong proponent of labor having an agenda. We know we don't want an authoritarian in office, but I think we also have to talk about what do we want? Because I don't want what we had before the authoritarian. I don't think uh the two-party duopoly is the best system for us either. And so we have to have a concrete agenda so that way we have a guide to follow, a way to determine who we endorse. So we're not just endorsing based off of things like what the candidate's best speech is and whatever dreams they're willing to sell us, but are they willing to um help our us push our agenda along? So if one of the things on our agenda is no less than $35 starting wage for any worker, that's the question that should be asked for anybody that we're willing to endorse. Yes, it should be less about us hearing what they want and more about seeing if they're willing to do what we want. I think also we have to strengthen organizational structures and work towards super majorities, which is something that CTU pushes very often, and use the pathways that have been set for us. We are working in the BTU to build our 10-to-1 ratios, make sure we have building representatives at every work site, make sure we have union chapter committees, make sure just these basic foundational things that help with organizing are strengthened. Because we can talk about all of these big issues and stopping the MAGA agenda and the future of the labor movement, but if we don't have anybody to show up to actually do the work and move these things along, we're just uh sharing our analysis and sharing a vision, but we don't just want to share a vision, we want that vision. I think we need to be working towards increasing membership, engagement, education, especially around things like May Day, contract alignment, workers' rights. And we need to be working to improve our relationships with community and whatever constituency we serve. I think these basic foundational organizing things are and pressing them even harder and harder and harder is going to be very important for whatever fight we want to get into.
Yeah, I think building off of that, I think at the core we're saying I think the same thing, which is great. But I think we have to be fighting unions, unions that are putting the struggles at the workplace and in our communities front and center in the world, the work we do. We cannot be pretending to have ambitions politically, wheeling and dealing in politics, if we're not actually doing the work of organizing our membership, winning strong contracts, making drastic, real improvements in our own memberships' lives. Um, Also, organizing density in the sectors that we represent, organizing in new sectors that don't have much representation, supporting workers who right now want to organize more than ever, even though the law is stacked against them, giving them the resources to organize. And then, yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing at the end. Like, we need to have a vision for a working class politics that actually serves the people, actually builds worker power, and is not, the fake version that is being offered through MAGA and other, other political ideologies that don't lead anywhere, that just lead us back in the same circles. So fully on board with that.
Jackson, in your piece, you wrote about the need for shared campaigns and aligned goals. aligned goals, but you emphasize that the joint bodies that bring together most unions, like central labor councils or the national AFL-CIO, are too often unable to lead that work because they're unable to mobilize the base of union members that in the same way that large local unions can, like the Chicago Teachers Union or the Baltimore Teachers Union. Can you say more about the types of shared campaigns or aligned goals that you envision and how we can get more of the labor movement pushing in
Yeah,
that
and I
direction?
would say, like, when you have praxis between the Central Labor Council and large locals, really tremendous things are possible, because then you're working across this layer of significant unions in one geography that can align around a set of tactics, campaigns, organizing new workers, etc. But we just don't see enough of that. And so one idea that is really gaining steam is, how do you align your contract demands? We see the UTLA, Teachers of Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego, all up and down the coast have aligned their contract expirations to now. A lot of them are bargaining currently. They've shared a set of really popular and impressive contract proposals, some of which include expanding childcare for all, for example, like I mentioned earlier. Also, Unite Here, Local 11 in Los Angeles. I just was learning about this campaign at the Bargaining for the Common Good conference recently in DC. And one thing they're helping with is cohering a whole set of locals and community groups around the World Cup and Olympics and contract expirations that are happening in May of 2028, when the UAW also has contract expirations for the big three, the CTU's contracts expiring then, and a whole set of locals are doing that to align with the call to action that the UAW made. And so if we can muster it, I think what SEIU Local 26 has done in the Twin Cities to align community and labor demands, both in sort of contract negotiations, in the legislative arena, and around federal policies, we can fight for things and win them together that we could never dream of on our own. And it increases the likelihood we can build the momentum necessary to win something that we've never won before, such as national health care for all. And I'd say, we could consider some structure tests prior to May of 28, because that might be too late for an authoritarian regime that is attempting to reduce our rights and freedoms right before our eyes. So Mayday Strong's helping to convene labor and community across the country to launch revenue campaigns to tax billionaires at state levels across the country and create a swell of activity that could fuel fights nationally. So, if in the event that Trump and his cronies like Steve Bannon, they are saying we'll go to jail if we don't restrict democratic rights and interfere with elections in November in the midterms, we got to be ready for that likelihood and possibility that they will declare martial law and continue to federalize the National Guard and really lean in their undemocratic values. And so part of what we have to do as democratic organizations is have structure tests for those types of threats to our very existential interests. And so, could we all go out on May 1st, whether it's taking a sick day or a personal day or calling off or a professional development day, and really disrupting? I know Indivisible is partnering with us on this. You could imagine what it would look like to have No Kings and May Day activities and the immigrant justice community working together as a day without workers. I think something like that is going to need to happen, and happen multiple times, to get ready for the threats ahead. And by the way, May Day this year is on a Friday. We probably shouldn't have to work on Fridays anyway. So I'd encourage everybody to start planning that that's going to be a day without workers, and we'll really test our mettle.
Great. So I was going to ask about the May 2028 alignment, but I think we've got it all covered. But Brandon,
Brandon may have more on that than
his union originated it. One thing I would ask is that obviously that that alignment is going to occur. It would be the last year of the Trump presidency, and Jackson, I think, eloquently described the potential for what could be done in the years and months and weeks leading up to that moment. But there's also what could be done during that moment. I mean, nobody strikes me as capable of a Pullman strike style reaction than Donald Trump in full Grover Cleveland regalia. So the question is, how do you prepare for that, and how do you get other unions off the sidelines to say that there is power if we do this and jump in together, despite the risks that may come from the Trump administration in their sort of final years in power?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember that the call for a general strike on contract alignment for May Day 2028 came out of a very different moment, where we are today. We were in the middle of the Biden administration. We were in the middle of our stand-up strike. We had plans and visions, and we still do, right, of to organize a lot more of the auto industry. But also, our strike spoke to so many of the core issues that working class people, union and non-union alike, we're dealing with around the country, no matter what industry or what sector you worked in or what union you were part of. And that's the fight for, living wages, the fight for, universal health care, the fight for retirement security, because that doesn't exist anymore. And the fight for our time back, right? We don't have to be in the richest country in the history of the world, working 7 days a week or two or three jobs just to get by. And so that is still the case today, right? Just because of the president is different doesn't mean that those issues aren't the primary issues that working class people are constantly, fighting to change those conditions, trying to change. And so we have more power in numbers. That's the whole idea behind contract alignment. We have to link up across unions, across the different states, across different contexts, and unite behind these issues. But obviously, things have changed in the sense because politically we are in a different situation than we were a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and the major thing that we're dealing with now is that those very foundations that allow us to exist as a labor movement are under attack, right? Democracy, our civil liberties, our right to organize, just throwing out contracts, right, in the federal government. If that's done in the federal level, it could be done at the state level. It could be attempted to uh, be done in the private sector. So these are all attacks that are existential ones. So I don't know what's going to happen between now, November 2025, and May Day 2028. But we have to be ready and prepared for whatever that is. But I will say one thing. I think it's going to be, again, returning to my other point earlier. We cannot go into May Day 2028 focused solely on Trump. I don't think the majority of the working class in this country would go on strike because of Donald Trump. That's really important, I think, to emphasize. So how we link up our different fights, I think, is a very important strategic question for us. I don't have the answers myself. I think that's part of what this conversation is about to start. But going forward, I think that's the organizing question in my mind. It's what is the program that workers, no matter what their political affiliations or ideas are, can get behind to change the trajectory that this country is going on right now.
So, in the first article published in the Roundtable, Peter Olney and Rand Wilson wrote, for workers to survive Trump's MAGA moment and build a fighting labor movement for the future, both electoral politics, something old, and militant actions to disrupt business as usual, something new for many unions, will be key. Do you agree? And how are you thinking about the 2026 and even 2028 elections?
I do agree, and I think that one of the things I said earlier applies here, which is being more strategic about vetting certain candidates. And I wholeheartedly agree with Brandon that it can't just be we don't want Trump. It has to be what type of candidates are we looking for, and what are we looking for them to do. I also think that one of the things that we need to do is increase our, I know in the BTU it's called our Committee on Political Education. It's our PAC, where we have the ability to endorse. I think we need to increase those memberships to increase our electoral power through money, but also through more people and different people, so that way different perspectives can be offered. And I think it's really important to expand our members' knowledge about um, all of the possibilities beyond just the Republican and Democratic Party. For so long, I believe labor has just been inherently tied to the Democratic Party. And I think some people, the same way they're not going to fight again or go out into the streets just to fight against Trump, they're not going to put in extra time and resources just to get the Democrats back in office. That can't be what it's about. And it can't be, hey guys, we got to just get them back in office so that we can actually do something different. No, people want something different now. And I think all the things we talked about earlier, as far as building structures, that is what we need to build the militant actions. And we're going to have to take time. I know that everything seems very urgent right now. Like, oh, we need to protest like tomorrow. We need to show up with a cadre against ICE. Yes, but that is alone is not going to get us to the militant actions that disrupt business as usual. It will increase visibility. It will continue to give people a place to corral. But the militant actions come from having strong organizational structures, strong communication, a clear and concise agenda, and understanding of what people are willing to do to accomplish the agenda, a strategic plan. Um, and we need different education. We need the spaces that we currently have, like our conventions, our membership meetings, our building representative meetings, our staff meetings, to be used as spaces to share a political analysis about what's going on, how militant actions, what are militant actions, how can they actually move people. People are not as inclined to do in your face militant actions. People are very comfortable with having discussions, offering theory and philosophy. But when it comes to, okay, if our issue is with the police, let's just go to the police station and stand and do whatever we need to do. Or let's, if it's with the school board, let's fill a room and everybody get board comment and flood their emails, and let's move into the street because we need to block a certain highway or something, to because we need to show that we're not being heard. Those actions are going to take us a while to get to, because it's so many things that we have to get people to be willing to do along the way. And so I think we have to start with these smaller structure tests. Something like something we're doing in the BTU is we have Wear It Wednesdays, where we're asking members to wear their shirt every Wednesday, literally for the rest of their career. There's no time frame. Every Wednesday. Because if we can't get people to just wear a shirt every Wednesday, how do we then get people to work to the contract? How do we then get people to walk out or do a sick out or not show up on May 1st, 2026. And so we have to have these smaller ways to move people along so we have more and more people with us as we build up to these militant actions.
Great.
Go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, no, I think just on the question of 26 and 28 elections, I think as unions, I think we have to be connecting our fights to the electoral process, meaning our endorsements have to be rooted in the fights that we're engaged in. That's how we went about it with the mayoral election in New York City, in terms of the endorsement we made there. With Zoran and that historic victory, it was rooted more so than anything on the fact that his agenda spoke directly to our members. Our members led the way in that fight, which led to the endorsement. We were the first union to endorse him when he was at 1% in the polls. And it was an incredibly unpopular thing to do at that moment, but we did it precisely because we knew he always showed up for us when we were out in the picket line, and he always showed up for us as an assembly member, and he had a platform that was directly speaking to the cost of living crisis that our members face first and foremost. But we have to do that everywhere. I think our members in Iowa in the agricultural implement sector are facing layoffs and a plant closure potentially in that sector. And so there's a key governor race happening right there. How do you engage with that in order to speak to the very reality of what our members are facing in that state? And I can go on and on. Every single state, there's a version of this fight that has to go beyond the Republican Democrat and then the primaries framing. It has to be about what are the issues, how do these different politicians engage with them or not engage with them or refuse to engage with them, and then how do we then also intervene and force folks to take a side when they're running for office. And I think that's a much more important way as a labor for us to be engaging with electoral politics than just again deal making and whatever else we do when we endorse candidates.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because this is an interesting day to be having this discussion specifically around politics, because today there was a thing called a discharge petition that was filed in Congress and the House of Representatives to overturn Donald Trump's executive order stripping union rights from 1 million workers. And they actually got enough Republicans, along with a significant, most, I think all Democrats, to actually get 218 votes. So that's going to get a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. And it shows the popularity of unions spreading into the politics and creating these interesting coalitions. But, Brandon, as you said before, one of these big challenges here is that, a significant portion of members of a lot of unions voted for Trump, as did, large sections of the broader working class, including the non-white working class. And what do you think unions, and this is for really everyone, what do you think unions should be doing to win members and the working class away from Trump and away from, because Trump's not going to be on the ballot anymore, we hope, away from MAGA politics?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the Democratic Party. If this is the same thing we're talking about, this is the one where Hakeem Jeffries was anxious about letting this vote go forward because he didn't want Mike Lawler, a Republican, to take the credit for it, right?
Right.
So, first and foremost, that's what working class people are tired of. This partisan politic way of framing everything in which, who gets the credit, which party wins, which party is the one that claims victory is more important than actually doing the right thing. If you've got a Congress voting on restoring and expanding union rights, who gives a damn? Who's signing off on that vote? And I think that's really important because especially if unions engage in that kind of thinking, how in the world are you going to make a case for, let's say, a Democratic candidate if that same Democratic candidate is that person or is supported by people who are refusing to do pro-worker things because they're worried about partisan politics before anything else? I mean, that to me is the ridiculous part of that whole story. And so I think there's just a trust factor that's a problem here. I think a lot of working people across the country just don't trust the Democratic Party establishment to do the right thing. I think it's really interesting that Democrats may run on, let's say, progressive or pro-worker policies in their platforms and lose, whereas ballot questions win overwhelmingly for things like expanding labor rights and unemployment rights and abortion and reproductive health questions, et cetera. Those things win consistently, right? Even in red states, especially in red states, not just in California or New York. And I think that's really important to remember, because I think at the bottom of that, I think folks just don't trust a Democratic Party politician to actually do the right thing. And we have to change that as unions. So I don't think it's a question about unions convincing anybody. It's about us listening to our members and what they're concerned about. We have to be responsive to our membership. If our membership does not want to engage with a certain kind of politics, we have no business talking down to our members about what they should think and not think about those candidates or that party or those kinds of politics. Instead, let's root ourselves in what's going on. What is the workplace fight about? What is the community fight about? What kinds of trade policies has the Democratic Party alongside the more ostensibly corporate controlled Republican Party push for that has led to the decimation of their communities? So these are the kinds of questions that I think this moment forces us as unions to think about, because if we don't do it and we let the establishment keep setting up the terrain for us, then we're just observers. We're just picking one pony or the other instead of actually setting the terrain of the fight ourselves.
Did Jackson or Diamante want to take that either?
Yeah, I mean, I might, agree with a bunch of what Brandon said. I might have some distinction without difference, or maybe there is a difference. I would argue that Trump really exploited the unpopularity of the bipartisan neoliberal consensus. The free trade that has decimated, working families across the industrial Midwest, that, really has undermined workers' power in key industries and sectors, has really lent itself to the diminishing numbers in the union movement. And he did it by pandering to workers and taking over a weak, hollowed out party structure. We are good to remember that Bernie practically did the same thing. Mamdani didn't run as an independent, right? Brandon Johnson didn't run as an independent. They were able to fuse together those popular positions and platform and ride a wave of union support and popular support through the Democratic Party, despite the Democratic Party. So I think that's kind of a huge lesson, particularly in this kind of parliamentary style two-party system that we have. There's a lot of tendencies wrapped up in it, and it's going to be determined by us in part who wins the battles within those parties. And we need to be clear about Trump, and this I think helps with how we talk to workers. It turns out the autocrats and the plutocrats are the same. You got a guy in the White House who is building a luxury banquet hall while robbing 12 million children of food benefits. You can't make that shit up. It's really stark. He's got the wealthiest cabinet in human history. He has presided over the greatest transfer of wealth to the bigwigs that we've ever seen, ever. So we have a pretty clear example of who we are, what we stand for, and what we're up against. And we need to make that clear, because, Trump isn't just your average oligarch. He's got fascists that are running his program. You look at Miller. Bovino is dressed like the Gestapo when they come into our cities and terrorize people throughout Chicago and Portland and now Charlotte. And so good unions had good anti-fascist popular education. They did not mince words about what these people really wanted to do and how they were stacking the deck on white supremacist rhetoric. And we better be really clear about that in the union movement, because if we're not, we really will feed into that right-wing populist rhetoric. And I think the great late Jane McAlevey also demonstrated, that it wasn't just kind of labor militancy by itself that won, in the 30s. It was, you had Democratic governors in Michigan and Minnesota that didn't crack down on those strikes, the sit-down strikes, the Minneapolis strikes, and didn't bring in the National Guard to crush them. So, we also have to be steely-eyed about like what our balance of forces are and how we're building them stronger and who's on our side and how to build a broad front against fascism.
I'll just add that I wholeheartedly and completely agree with Brandon. I think focusing on issues that members care about is really, really important. And that can be connected to pushing members away from Trump at the same time. I don't think it's an either or, it's an and. So, but our language has to be more worker focused. Right now, I think our language is very like white middle class focused when we're talking about authoritarianism, democracy, all even when we talk about like healthcare, everyone doesn't even have the privilege of having healthcare. What about the people that don't even have a job to get healthcare? Or we talk about student loan debt. Like, isn't the minority of people actually even go to college to even get the student loan debt? And so when we're talking about moving people away from something, we once again have to talk about what we're moving them to. And so listening to the members to hear, so if they are voting for Trump, we need to be asking, what is it that you like about Trump? What did you hear that resonated with you? Instead of just trying to convince them that he's wrong and bad, listen to what they're saying and then say, okay, um, well, there's these other 4 or 5 people that could also do that. What do you think about that? Or even further moving people away from the person that's supposed to save us to what they want to see different about systems. What is it that Trump is willing to do with the system that you like? What most people like is that he's saying the government be on some bullshit. And and he's trying, and even though he might not be doing what people want him to be doing, he fucking something up. Like, who knows what he's doing, but he's doing something. And people want to see, and so people want those concrete things. So, not just we're going to fight back against authoritarianism, but okay, we're going to have an agenda where we are going to move from only this percentage of people being housed to this percentage of people being housed. We're going to be working towards maybe universal health care instead of worrying about what it call all of the costs and healthcare premiums, which only a certain type of person can afford. And connecting the policies that Trump and any other decision maker is putting forth that hurts unions, and also helping members see the policies that decision makers are putting forth that helps unions, so that they can see the distinction. It's not Trump versus, it's this is the side that helps unions. Look at these policies. These are the people that's for these policies. These policies over here, they hurt unions. These are the people that afford these policies. Because when we get caught up in the labels, right wing, left wing, Republican, Democrat, it immediately starts to create some type of marginalization or isolation. And not because people may disagree, because people just don't know what you're talking about. And most people aren't going to be like, hey, can you explain democracy to me? What do you mean when you say we want democracy? What do you mean when you say we want an authoritarian government? And so knowing that most people won't ask, we need to be willing to explain and tell and connect, and once again connect our endorsements to a working class agenda. The endorsements for Trump were not connected to a working class agenda. It was connected to a culture that people want, which is separate from a working class agenda. And actually, us putting that on the table is probably going to be important too, especially when we're trying to build capacity with Black and Brown organizers and workers. If you look at the No Kings rallies, they're amazing, but most of the people that's there are, once again, white middle class people. And so we have to figure out how to connect these dots and speak to the actual worker, so that way people like Trump won't capture them instead.
Thank you so much for that. So yeah, Jackson, you mentioned the importance of anti-fascist political education, and Diamante touched on some really important principles about, are you even speaking in terms that are relevant in people's lives? So this is really a question for all of you. Can you talk about efforts to take this up in your unions? If you are, what's working? What lessons can you share for other unions who may want to take this up?
I can start this one. Yeah, I think Diamante is really right about like the abstraction of democracy doesn't hit for most people because they are really um, just upset with the state of affairs, the paycheck to paycheck, the rising costs of property taxes, healthcare, you name it. And so they're disenchanted. And so to say, well, we need this thing that never got you what you needed is not going to do the trick. But I do think in talking with our members, really focused in on, hey, have you ever had to rely on a paycheck and a wage to survive? Have you ever needed and relied upon good health care? Have you ever, you know, depended on needing housing? Have you ever had a bad boss? And everybody's hands mostly will go up when you ask these questions. And we got some bad bosses running the country right now, whether it's Elon Musk, Bezos, Trump himself, and the billionaire boys that are running amok. I think there's a way to talk to people about who they are, what their interests are, what they've just done, how they've increased their wealth, how it puts us all in harm's way, how, the cuts to education, the things they're going to try to do to HUD that put 160,000 people with disabilities out of their homes. Like, these are really dangerous ideas that will wreak havoc on people's lives. So I think talking about that, talking about the fact, this is in the freedom trainers literature, when there is a backsliding democracy and authoritarianism is taking over, um, when labor is not involved in the fight to advance the interests of the many, then autocracy will consolidate in 70% of the cases. But when labor is involved, 80% of the time we win and we're able to do a U-turn and actually engage in transformation and reshape, the system that we had inherited in a better way, in a more robust way. So I think it opens the door to how could we do things differently moving forward, and how do we resist at the same time.
Great. So Brandon, you did mention before this endorsement that UAW gave to Zohran Mamdani. I think, one of the more exciting developments on the left that we've seen quite a long time. His obviously his main theme of his election was affordability and cost of living, and that does seem to resonate across the country. There's been polling on the things that he was putting forward in that campaign, and they do very well no matter where you are, even if there are places with not necessarily the same politics as New York City. From your perspective, in terms of worker power and those kinds of issues, do you see any lessons that you can take from the campaign that Zohran ran with your endorsement? and how widely applicable do you think those lessons are across the country?
Yeah, I think every part of the country has its own Zoran, has its own campaign that I think can be um, fought along the lines that that one was fought on. Um, what that means in a specific place, is up to those folks. But right now, we know we have a crisis of affordability. We have a cost of living crisis. Unions are on the front lines of that because we directly negotiate with our bosses to address those cost of living issues, healthcare, childcare, cost of rent, wages that can actually sustain yourself and your family. And so we know that that's one of the most important thing, if not the most important thing to address in a contract fight or an organizing drive. Personally, I think I've had a lot of organizing drives where when we organize, it's I organize in sectors that have a lot of young workers in the workforce in the membership. So trying to plan to have a family and the cost of childcare is essential, the cost of rent. And so for Zoran to have an entire campaign around that plus fast and free buses that directly spoke to the vast majority of our members, 20,000 members in New York City, who are renters, many of them who are young and have a family or want to start having a family, planning to have a family, and are um, constantly worried about being able to keep up with rent increases in the city. So, those are the issues that affect, working people in New York City, and therefore he hit it. But the most important thing I think he did campaigning wise was to build a coalition of, obviously young people who like really wanted to be, to see the city kind of take on their issues, but also build that coalition, expand it with salvation immigrant communities, working class communities that other politicians, the Democratic Party, um, other political coalitions had excluded before, had never brought in and organized. And so he was able to link up renters, young people, immigrants, the working class, precisely in neighborhoods that went towards Trump in the 2024 election because of his platform. And he did that through what to me seemed on the ground like an organizing drive, right? It was a field operation that was just incredibly inspiring and mobilized by the people, 100,000 plus volunteers. And then our members were involved in that from the very beginning. So I think there's a lot of lessons there. The issues in different cities may be slightly different, but and what kind of candidate would resonate in that context may be different. But I think that that's at the core of it. At the core of it was a vision, a message that inspires people, that speaks to them, and then an operation that actually brings people in. And now, as the labor movement going forward, I think beyond an endorsement of his program and lobbying and things of that sort, which are going to be important, we need Zoran to be a very effective and successful mayor. I think we need to take this energy towards organizing more broadly beyond his agenda, towards workplace organizing, towards tenant organizing, towards all kinds of organizing, because one mayor and one city council, and no matter how much you can push the governor to actually try to enact parts of that agenda that need funding from Albany, there's still a ton of other things we're going to have to address because at the bottom of it, New York is at the epicenter of capitalist America and all the concentration of power and wealth that exists in this country. And so, we're going to need a strong labor movement. So I've been trying to spread the message across, the New York City labor movement that this is the time to actually get really serious about even, building our density even higher than it already is. We have the highest union density of any city in the country, but it's not enough. We have to keep organizing, and we're going to have a mayor that actually supports organizing, that actually will call on a boycott of Starbucks when Starbucks Workers United asks for it, who's going to support the 1,000 workers at the Met Museum who just organized with UAW, who have filed for an election. Those things make a huge difference. And I think he's also a the kind of politician who will think creatively with unions, with other organizations, to address working class issues in a way that I think most politicians wouldn't remotely even consider.
Right.
So you are all elected union officials, but you've all been in different positions in the labor movement, including as rank and file members. I imagine we have people in all different types of positions in the labor movement tuning into this webinar tonight. What advice would you give to union activists in various roles about what they should be doing to help defend worker power under Trump 2.0?
I have some strategies, some suggestions that are probably not what people are thinking, but I would say simple things like read your union communications so that way you know what's going on and where the opportunities are to help get more involved and build capacity. Talk to your coworkers because I think it's important that people know how people are feeling, what people are thinking, and you can't fight with people you don't know. And so we need to start knowing each other. And so I think it's important that we talk to our coworkers. And I'm talking about rank and file members, leaders, whatever position you're in. And for leaders and union staff specifically, I would say visit your members, visit work sites, increase your presence in work sites because people need your presence right now. They need to know that everything is just not about what we're asking people to do for their union, but just human interaction and the fact that we're willing to be in those spaces. And that's how you learn more about what members want. So I'll just offer those things that I think will help people increase their involvement, have a better understanding of each other. And I know some people are not in proximity to each other enough to, if you're in leadership, to visit your members more. And if that's the case, I would say call more.
Great. Jackson or Brandon, you have other
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
I would say it's also important for unions to build connections across their different members, especially if you're in a union that has different kinds of sectors or workplaces. Just briefly go back to the Zoran moment. I actually went to a local outside of New York City, and I was speaking to a member. And this is in the big three, and auto. And they asked me about the endorsement. They were like, "Oh, like why did we endorse Zoran Mandani?" Like, and I think at the bottom of that was just kind of like confusion, given that they probably saw some propaganda about Zoran or what he stands for, etc. So but he was like, okay, I really want to make sense of this, right? And I went through just the issues that our members are going through in New York City, the kinds of cost of living issues that Zoran's speaking to. And then I went further and I said, listen, I've had a conversation with his team about really interesting legislation that actually affects your sector, in that the citywide fleet of vehicles that the city uses is not fully union made. We could do that. We could change that. We could actually help out our members in the heavy truck industry who are constantly facing layoffs and the threats of moving to work way out of this country, by actually making the garbage trucks in New York City completely UAW made. And so that was interesting. And I think that's the kind of politics we need to be building, right? Not just fighting them on ideological fronts, but building those connections to show which politicians, which organizations, which movements are actually serious about building those bridges across, the working class.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I was kind of struck when we had our Labor Day mobilization this year in Chicago. We were trying to shift the AFL-CIO around not just beer and barbecues or holding up your obscure local banner, but something more broad and connected to workers over billionaires, and an agenda we could all believe in and would help organize all people who are not in unions. And 60% of the folks who showed up to that were pro-union workers, but not in a union. So I do think we have to continue organizing with and fighting alongside groups that have been largely left behind and are on the outside looking into our unions. And we are likely in this country on the cusp of a significant rupture of some kind or another. So think recession or depression, martial law declaration, a war against Venezuela. And those are usually moments when history accelerates before our eyes. And we have to be ready to create and embrace new worker formations, defense organizations, not unlike the CIO's birth, or the anti-eviction campaigns, or unemployment councils, or civil rights organizations that were birthed out of crises in the past.
Great. Well, that's a great place to leave it. I want to thank Brandon Mancilla from UAW, DeMonte Brown from Baltimore Teachers Union, Jackson Potter from the Chicago Teachers Union. I think it's a moment of opportunity in the labor movement, and it was great to have a discussion about labor in the age of Trump that wasn't a complete downer, that had a lot of really good thoughts about what to do in the future. So thanks to Natasha as well, and to Labor Notes and Haymarket Books. And thank you for having us, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you.
All right.